India and Sri Lanka share close relationship, a very substantive and civilizational relationship. With me is Tharaka Balasuriya, who is the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs of Sri Lanka. So welcome to WION. It's pleasure to speak to you here in Delhi and see you back in Delhi again, this time for the BIMSTEC Foreign Ministers meeting. My first question to you is about the relationship. How do you see India-Sri Lanka relationship?
It's always good to be back in Delhi. Last time I was here was for the Raisina dialogue. The relationship between Sri Lanka and India, I think, is at an all-time high. And we have our bilateral ties are very good. We are collaborating in different spheres. And I think what we need to do is to make sure that some of the things which we have discussed will materialize in the future very soon. So I would say that the relationship between Sri Lanka and India at an all-time high.
All-time high, and we have seen how India supported you economically during the crisis. If you can talk about the current economic situation in your country, because I believe the bankruptcy is over, and also the Indian support in terms of the bailout package which is being discussed with the IMF, and India's economic support.
Yeah, I think we still, I wouldn't say we are out of the woods. We still have a long way to go. Our debt restructuring has pretty much finished, bilateral, and also we have made agreements with the bondholders. But we need, in terms of generating new revenue streams, we need to be looking at new avenues to generate new revenue streams. And I think as even during the last visit, I mentioned that the India's role in helping Sri Lanka was fundamental in Sri Lanka making a quick recovery, whereas the multinational institutions should have stepped in such a scenario. It took a little bit of time for the multilateral institutions to step in. So it was India who stepped in with the 4.5 billion loan. At that time, we didn't have, let's say, the fuel. There were fuel queues which were 2 or 3 miles long. We didn't have gas. We were short of medicine. And Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka, it was very gloomy in Sri Lanka. But now I think if you have visited Sri Lanka, you will see that most things are back to normal, and the tourism is thriving. Tourists are back in numbers. The economy is doing quite well. In this year, the growth rate was 5.3% in the first quarter. So I think we are back in the right track. And of course, in order to achieve that, we also had to take very difficult measures, such as raising the taxes, such as not extending the public service, and also such as making sure that reducing subsidies and making sure that the pricing was cost-based. So we had to go through a tough period. But I'm optimistic to say that the most of it is now behind us. And from when in my overseas travels, that maybe 1 year back, when you meet foreign dignitaries, the first thing they ask is, how's the situation in Sri Lanka? Is there food to eat? Do you have queues anymore? Do you have fuel? Most of the foreign dignitaries would ask those questions. But I think now when you visit other countries, most of the foreign dignitaries are asking, how were you able to make such a quick recovery? And also the interest in Sri Lanka from all over is growing due to its location. So I'm very optimistic for the medium term and the long term prospects of Sri Lanka.
And India has also stepped up its support to Sri Lanka in terms of infrastructure development, whether it's the oil fields we have been talking about, or whether it is providing training to your civil servants.
So yes, indeed, I think one of the new revenue streams which we are looking at is pertaining to energy. Both my president and the Prime Minister Modi are interested in making Trincomalee an energy hub. We are also looking at grid connectivity with India. So we are looking at connectivity with India in different spheres. People-to-people connectivity is very important. We are looking at the sea connectivity, maybe restarting the ferry service, maybe on a roll-on, roll-off basis, ferries. Then we are looking at the air connectivity. Now there are flights flying to from Chennai flying to Jaffna, but we are also in discussions with India to increase the length of the tarmac so larger planes can come to Jaffna. Then we are looking at grid connectivity. So we are looking at connectivity with India in a large way.
Are you also looking with India, Sri Lanka and a third country? For example, India, Japan and Sri Lanka when it comes to ports, or India, Russia and Sri Lanka when it comes to the airports?
Well, it depends on the industry. I think now if you look at the Mattala airport, it's India, Sri Lanka and Russia, and from the perspective of Sri Lankans, the highest number of tourists come to Sri Lanka from India. The second highest number come from Russia. So it makes all the sense to have a tripartite agreement and to make sure that more tourists visit Sri Lanka. So I think we should not just be looking at India, but also through India, we should be looking at it as a gateway to the rest of the South Asia and also to Southeast Asia.
So you mentioned about connectivity. Now, one connectivity which is being discussed is the land connectivity between India and Sri Lanka. This was one of the key outcomes from the earlier visit of the Sri Lankan president. How is it going about, and what's the view in Sri Lanka regarding it?
It's proceeding well at the highest level. I think the terms of reference has been done, and then also RFP has been given to Sri Lankan side, and the Sri Lankan side is now we need to select a consultant in that regard. The bridge itself will, I think, take about 4 years to build. So that will be a game changer. Today in the morning, the foreign ministers had a time with Prime Minister Modi ji, and one thing I again emphasized was the bridge. And one point which the Prime Minister made was that if you look at the EU and if you look at South Asia or Southeast Asia for that matter, what he pointed out was the reason that the EU succeeded is simply because of connectivity. So be it India and Sri Lanka, or be it the road network between India and Myanmar and Thailand, we need to improve connectivity in all its forms. So there'll be more business transactions taking place if there's better connectivity.
So you mentioned bridge in 4 or 5 years. Any year you are looking at? I know it's very initial. There is still more to do, but any year you are looking at?
I hope that the construction on the bridge will start as soon as possible. I mean, just think in terms of tourist numbers. Okay, I believe that if you look at the internal tourists, the local tourists, the Tamil Nadu gets the most number of tourists. They get about 140 million tourists. Rameshwaram alone gets 10 million tourists. Okay, so where does Sri Lanka stand in this? Sri Lanka at the moment, we have got about 1.1 million tourists this year, and we are looking to get 2.4 million tourists at the end of the year. I think if we have a bridge, that 2.4 million or 5 million tourists coming from India can take place within months. So we need to. We've been building walls for too long, so we need to build bridges now.
And that's a nice way to put up. There's another thing that is maybe part of a kind of not a positive development, I would term it. Sri Lanka plans to expand its seabed. India also plans to expand its seabed. It has put up a proposal as well. What's the update like? Is this an issue that is a thorny one between India and Sri Lanka?
No, certainly not. I think each country has a right to claim beyond the 200 nautical miles. So if there are areas of contention, those areas can be discussed and resolved bilaterally, and we plan on having discussions with India and resolving this matter amicably.
Have you raised it with the Indian side so far?
No, this was the BIMSTEC meeting, so
Okay.
it wasn't a bilateral meeting. I did have a meeting with the Dr. Jaishankar, but we didn't discuss on this issue. There was other bilateral matters which we discussed.
In the past, has this been discussed? Because it looks like an old proposal.
I don't think that there is a major issue pertaining to this. We had a similar issue with the Maldivians, and then we decided we will discuss with the Maldivian government bilaterally, and that can be sorted out amicably. So I don't think these are areas of contention.
Sir, coming back to connectivity, I believe there's so much thing to talk about connectivity between India and Sri Lanka. One is financial connectivity. We saw the UPI being agreed on between India and Sri Lanka. That will help a lot of Indian tourists going to your country. What are the other proposals we are looking at? The usage of Indian rupee, is this also on the anvil?
Yes, I think it's I mean, from Sri Lanka's side, we become less dollar dependent. Okay, let's say if the more Indian tourists comes to Sri Lanka, if we can pay for the Indian goods in Indian rupees, then we save a lot of money in terms of the commissions and converting our money to dollars and paying your receipts in dollars. So it makes more sense to it makes more sense to pay for those goods in the local currency. So I think it's a very good proposal, and it will be also very easy for the Indian tourists to come to Sri Lanka and pay in Indian rupees.
So is there work happening on trading in the national currencies between India and Sri Lanka?
Yes, the work is proceeding well, and I think by next year we have identified a certain number of locations that these machines can be used in order to trade. In order I think whatever the ATMs or whatever that can be used. Yeah.
There are another issue that maybe Sri Lanka and India might not see eye to eye. One is the visit of the Chinese vessels, which obviously is worry for New Delhi regarding the security in the region. It's for its own security in the region. So what has been the Sri Lankan view about the visits of the Chinese vessels, and how have you assured this with New Delhi?
You mean the research?
The research vessels or any kind of major interaction is seen with a security dimension here in New Delhi?
Well, as you are aware that there's a moratorium which is in place, and will be till the end of the year. And at the end of the year, we will review our position. But we are also very interested in developing our own capacity. So I think once we develop our own capacity as a sovereign country, then we can do the research ourselves. So this, in terms of Sri Lanka's issues, is not a major priority. Of course, we have time and over again stated that we are very interested in India's security interest. We don't want to. We want to make sure that no country uses Sri Lanka in order to threaten India's security, and we have given that assurance, and we will work towards that. But we will also want to trade with other countries. I don't think that India should view China as enemy. I think perhaps India can view China as a competitor. Certainly, India does far more trade with China than Sri Lanka does with China. I think India's trade with China is about 140 billion, whereas Sri Lanka's trade with China is a fraction of that. So perhaps maybe even Sri Lanka can be an opportunity for these two big countries to trade.
And any conversation on Kotte Island, which has been something that was discussed, raised during the Indian political election cycle?
That's a internal matter, and it has not been raised by the Indian partners, and it has been addressed in the 1970s.
Okay.
So I don't think that's a matter which we need to raise up.
Okay.
I think the certain Indian politicians raised that matter from a historical perspective, to show that. From India's perspective, perhaps it was a mistake, but Indians have not raised the matter of Kotte Islands to Sri Lanka. And as far as I think after independence, in 3 or 4 occasions that the matter has been raised by the Indians. Once when Sri Lanka was still a dominion of the United Kingdom, where the Royal Air Force used it for bombing purposes, and then the Indians raised concern on that. Then regarding the fishing rights, and then later on there were discussions on the islands being used by the smugglers. But I think historically the sovereignty of the island has not been questioned, and I think it's a matter which is done and dusted.
Sir, my last few questions, this time on the multilateral aspect. You're here for the BIMSTEC Foreign Ministers meeting. Where do you see this grouping going forward?
I feel that there's more political will, and I feel that there's 2 billion people which are being represented in the BIMSTEC, and certainly that we need to have closer integration within the BIMSTEC. We have been talking about an FTA within the BIMSTEC, and certainly I think a FTA should come into place, hopefully, and there's more political will. Now just imagine now BIMSTEC alone represents 2 billion people, and in Thailand and Myanmar are also represented in ASEAN. And then ASEAN represents a further 2 billion people. So you're talking about 4 billion people. I would think that within the next few years there will be a more closer dialogue with the BIMSTEC members, and it's only 7 members, so we can have closer dialogue. One proposal which was agreed was at the United Nations in September every year for the BIMSTEC foreign ministers also to meet and have discussions. So this was a foreign ministers retreat. The discussions were very open and frank. It was not, we were not looking at notes or anything. It was very informal, where our ideas and suggestions were taken into consideration. So we are looking at certain verticals in terms of energy security, in terms of food security, and in terms of the people's security, and then all the other sub classes can be put into these 3 areas.
My last question regarding BIMSTEC as well. What are your hopes from the upcoming summit in Thailand?
Well, we want the summit to be successful, and we want the things to materialize in terms of the BIMSTEC itself is 27 years old. So the charter was passed during our presidency, but we want something concrete to come out of BIMSTEC. Now, if you say that you are a member of the EU, then you feel like you're a member of the EU. You can travel freely within each country. So I think in order for BIMSTEC to be successful, we need to have the people in these countries, ordinary people in these countries, needs to feel that there's an organization called BIMSTEC, and because of this organization, there are certain benefits that the people are gaining. But of course, the other areas, which there was a multitude of areas which we spoke of, including space and nano satellites and all those things. So those things might not be now. Of course, they'll be very important to people in terms of let's say in terms of education and providing connectivity, internet facilities and all those things. But those those discussions people might not feel it immediately. We are also hopeful that FTA will come through in the BIMSTEC, and there are other areas such as let's say for medical purposes, e-visas to India are allowed for the BIMSTEC countries. I mean, there was an array of areas which we discussed, but as I mentioned, for easy understanding, we would want to put it into these three verticals, and then of energy security, food security, and also the people's security, and whatever the other areas be incorporated under these verticals.
Well, on that note, thank you so much, sir, for speaking to WION and giving that substantive assessment about India-Sri Lanka relationship, but also BIMSTEC's grouping's future. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you for having me.